Get more confidence. Get that promotion. Get moving up the corporate ladder. Get a better gig with an MBA from Mays Business School at Texas A&M University. Whether you're starting out or stepping up, now you can take your career to a whole new level with a full-time MBA in College Station and convenient weekend options at Houston City Center. Texas A&M has a program to suit your schedule. Visit mba.tamu.edu. And Giga Maggie.
Howdy, welcome to Mays MasterCast. I'm Shannon Deere, the Assistant Dean for Graduate Programs, here with your stupendous host, Ben Wiggins.
Good morning, Shannon.
Hi, Benjamin.
One of my favorite parts of the week is trying to figure out what adjective you're going to use this week. I always appreciate them.
Mine too. I'm like, oh, that one came just at the moment. But sometimes I've thought about what I'm going to say.
Yes.
Because we also see each other oftentimes on Sunday for our home church we do together. So then I think, oh, what adjective does Ben deserve tomorrow when we're at home church?
Well, that's very kind of you. And despite everything going on out there, it is a beautiful day in Aggieland.
It is a beautiful day in Aggieland. It looks beautiful. Once you step outside, it might not feel beautiful, but it looks beautiful.
Right. It looks amazing. And just don't take too long walking to your car.
That's right. That's right. Or you might melt. But Hey, it's cool. It's cool. What's going on?
We have a great guest today. That's one thing that's going on. There's a lot of other stuff that's going on. The market is, as it has been for the past few months, doing far better than any reasonable person would expect. But
true.
But yeah, we got a great guest today.
Yeah, today we have Deb Merril on the show. Deb is a former EMBA student, so it's very exciting to have her on and hear about all of her great accomplishments. Deb is also the president of retail at EDF, which is one of the top 5 suppliers to the large commercial and industrial segment. Prior to EDF, Deb led Just Energy, a business she started with some former colleagues, for 4 years as the president and co-CEO. She led the company through a transformation to a customer-focused retail energy provider, delivering real value to customers. During her time as co-CEO, she improved the business performance and expanded outside North America by adding operations in the United Kingdom, Ireland, Germany, and Japan. Deb talks a lot about the time she spent on a plane in her career, and you can definitely see why. Deb is active in various organizations, including serving on the advisory board for the Women's Energy Network and the Hawthorn Club, another women's group. We appreciate Deb's insights, and we hope you enjoy the show.
Thanks for listening, and let's get into it.
We welcome Deb Merril to the show. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing all right. It's interesting times we live in and has been for several months now, but we're making it.
It does seem like it's forever ago when this started. I remember when somebody first said social distancing to me. I actually remember where I was when they said, well, I've heard of this thing called social distancing. And it was on a Sunday. And I thought, what is this thing they're talking about? And now it's just completely the norm. So it's crazy how quickly things change.
It's funny you say that because I feel like COVID is now the defining current event of my lifetime.
Yep.
It was 9/11 before now, and now it's COVID. But you said you remembered where you were when someone said social distancing to you for the first time. I don't have a single event that I remember where I was when X happens.
Okay.
And it's that it seemed like a strange current event in that way because there's not like one touch point of it. But for you, that is not the case.
Yeah, that's interesting to say it like that. You're right. It's these big events. You remember where you were when you heard.
Right. Right.
This is just a long kind of slow drip. It's not a big bang. So.
Right. Oh, I definitely remember where I was when someone said, turn on the TV for 9/11.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I remember where I was standing in the room.
Mm-hmm.
And I even remember where I was when I found out Osama bin Laden had been killed. But yeah, COVID's been kind of a different animal.
It is definitely.
What is your favorite superpower?
And this is a superpower that I always tell people when I chat about kind of my journey and where I've been, where I'm going. about, I talk about superpowers a lot. And it's funny you asked that question, because if any talk I give, any luncheon or anything, I always say, you have to know what your superpower is. So that's kind of when I started to really understand what, made me good at something, and understanding that superpower and then using it. It's something that I encourage women, everybody to do in your career. So it's funny that this is your starting question, because this is something that is part of what I, talk about all the time. And for me, it's not even, I guess it's a superpower I believe I have. I have the ability to absorb other people's superpowers. So I tell everybody that I'm like Rogue from the Marvel comics, but Rogue kills people when she does it. I don't do that. I'm very nice. I'm a nice version of Rogue. Where I feel like, the people I've worked with over my career, kind of identifying what they're good at and being able to absorb it myself and to adapt and to make it part of what I do has been something that I've used that superpower, and I've understood it over the years better, but I've used it to help me be a better mother, be a better, boss, be a better leader. It's been a really helpful one.
Let's talk about that in the context of being a boss or a leader. Can you give us an example of how that works exactly? Can you tell a story where you absorbed another superpower and found it particularly useful or enlightening?
So there are a lot of small data points. I don't know if there's ever one big one where I feel like, I've completely.
Where you remember where you were.
Yeah, I don't remember that. But every person I've had that has been my boss throughout my career, I always identified pretty quickly what they were really good at. And and I've told people over the years that you don't have to like your bosses. Like you won't have every boss that you absolutely love. It just doesn't happen that way in life. But if you can identify what they're really good at and try to learn that skill from them, it kind of makes it a really, it's an interesting way to approach learning from somebody. So throughout the years, I've had people who, one of my bosses was incredibly good at finance, and understanding and very methodical in the way he approached a problem. And so I remember kind of being frustrated because we had very different ways of approaching things, and just trying to take everything else away and say, okay, how can I focus on learning that skill? Because I know that person's really good at that. So it's kind of been, every time, and even in my current role at EDF, I'm, learning new people, and I'm getting to know folks, and that's the first thing I try to do is I try to understand what they're really good at.
Okay. Let's back up for a second. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in a small town, 3 miles outside of a town with one stoplight in Ohio. So Midwest. So
Okay.
3 miles outside of West Salem, Ohio, which is not a place you've heard of.
How many in your family?
I'm the youngest of 3 girls.
Okay. What did your parents do? How did that impact you?
My dad was a tractor mechanic. So I grew up on my uncle's farm, actually, he also owned a tractor dealership. So my dad was a service manager, and fixed tractors for a living. So coveralls, dirt under the fingernails, lifting heavy things. My mother was a stay-at-home mom until my parents divorced. And then she had to go to work she'd never worked. She was a stay-at-home mom. She, I think, had my sister when she was 17 or 18. So, kind of young mothers. And she transitioned to driving a school bus. And so she drove a school bus from the time I was in 6th grade all the way until the time she passed away. And she retired 6 months before she passed away, but she drove a school bus for like 30 years. So she loved it.
Okay. What was your greatest challenge as a child?
Being the youngest of 3 girls, I had 2 older sisters who were, people say girls are all nice, but, sometimes they were a big challenge. But actually, I think, one of the defining moments in my life, both my parents worked hard. They were, blue collar, not necessarily educated, smart, but not educated. So my mother didn't finish high school. My dad finished high school. I was the first person in my family to go to college. So, and I think, when they divorced, my mother had no way of supporting herself. So she was a stay-at-home mom. She didn't have a high school education. She, had to find a way to support herself. So, and I think watching her struggle when I was in sixth grade. So what are you, you're 12 when you're in sixth grade?
Yeah.
So watching her struggle was something that I very quickly said to myself, that will never happen to me. Like, I will make sure I find a way to financially support myself and rely on my ability to, make my financial stability on my own, to make sure that I wasn't caught in that position. So that was something that was incredibly defining, but also, watching somebody you love struggle really can help you understand what is important and what you need to do to be able to make your life a little bit better. Because every parent wants that for your kids, right? Every parent wants your child to have something better than you had. So my mother and my father were incredibly proud of me, and great people, and wouldn't change any of the lessons I learned from them in any way.
And then, with that in mind, what was your first job?
I started working in the summers in middle school, high school, babysitting, which watching other people's kids is always a fun way to learn about children.
A lot of things, yeah.
Yeah, but I think my first kind of job was in college. I put myself through school. So every summer I worked in the library at the College of Wooster. So I went to the College of Wooster, which is a small liberal arts school close to where I grew up.
Okay.
And I went there because I applied to one college because somebody told me they gave a lot of scholarships, and I knew I had to put myself through school. So I applied, and thank God got in. And it's an incredible school. It's a small liberal arts school that is, very well thought of and has a great kind of community, and it's close to where I grew up. So I was, as part of that scholarship, I had a work study kind of allowance. So I had a job on campus where it helped me pay some of the bills and some of the tuition. So I worked in the government documents section of the library at the College of Wooster. And Margaret Powell was my boss there, and she was incredible. So I did that in the summer, and every break I possibly could to try to make money to pay for school.
Makes sense. Give us 60 seconds on your career path, your road to Mays. How did things progress from there?
My second job out of college was with Enron, which was a whole adventure in its own. And
I'm sure.
I worked my way through, learned the energy industry from the ground up. I started scheduling gas behind Chicago city gates, and really learned kind of from the logistics all the way through the trading part of the business. So it was a great kind of rotational journey that I was able to learn a lot about the industry. And then probably I moved to Houston in 98. I was working for Enron in Ohio. They moved me down to Houston, and I heard about the Executive MBA program at Mays. And I was actually I was the first class of the Executive MBA program in Houston.
Okay.
So from 99, I think, is the first year. And then in 2001, it was an 18-month program. So we were the inaugural group in Houston. And from the time I knew that I wanted to get my MBA, I knew that I wanted to go through the executive program, and learned a lot about A&M through coworkers who were smart and had a lot of great things to say. So that's what brought me there.
What was noteworthy about being part of the EMBA inaugural class? What do you think, looking back on that, what do you feel like was different or innovative then in a way that would continue into today, or that you might not see today?
It was, you don't know what you don't know. I wasn't part of, or didn't see any other executive MBA programs.
Right.
It's not like, but there was a sense of us being the first. And I think the professors and Julie Orzabal, who was the assistant at the time and is now, I think, running the executive MBA program in Houston, it was very collaborative and kind of learning together and exciting, because I think that they were excited to get it off the ground, and we were all excited to be part of the first class. So there was a little bit of pioneering vibe that came from that group that I think was pretty cool. Like I said, I haven't been part of another one, but that one felt like, we were talking about being a little bit more on the being the first is kind of cool, and learning along the way. And I could tell the excitement from the staff who felt like they were seeing something get started. And clearly it's been a very successful program. And I chat with Julie every once in a while and over email, and it seems like things are going really well. So
it seems to me that often our darkest moments are what lead to our greatest moments of success and self-actualization. How did the collapse of Enron lead you into entrepreneurship? What were the things that you took away from that helped you move forward into what has become the rest of your career? Does that question make sense?
It does. And I believe that everything happens for a reason. So whatever that looks like, whether it's, God, karma, whatever that feels like to people. But for me, I look and say, okay, if Enron hadn't collapsed, I wouldn't have started Just Energy, and I wouldn't have, be where I am today. And so I believe that it was as this chapter of my life where my kids are older, and I think it's just natural that you look more toward yourself to say, okay, what do you want and what's important to you versus trying to just do the next thing to get to the next level. And so once you get to a certain place in your career, you stop and say, okay, what's important to me? And I remember sitting down, and I met a good friend of mine during this time who was also going through the same process I was going through, where she was in venture capital. She had decided she wanted to do the next chapter as well. And she said, her name's Sandy, who I adore. She was very intentional about thinking about, okay, what makes me happy? And she taught me this when I had a coffee with her when I first met her. And I tell her this story all the time, that she actually put her happiness, she graphed her happiness index. And I was like, what? You did an Excel file? That is awesome. Like, who does that? But she said, I pointed the places in going back in my career and saying, where was I the happiest and most engaged in my career? Happiness is, one thing, but being engaged, like, you can't wait to get up and go to work. Can't wait to solve a problem. Can't wait to be there. And so as she went back through, she tried to identify the variables that at that point in time, what she was doing, what made her the most engaged and happy in what she was doing. And I thought it was brilliant. So I did the same thing. I didn't have an Excel file. I didn't have a graph, but I definitely had data points, and realized that for me, I wanted to be learning something new. So whatever I did, I wanted to be, I am, I talk about being at Enron, being around smart people, and my superpower being absorbing superpowers of others. I am like a sponge. So when I am around people who are smart and doing something that I'm learning something from, I get a lot of joy out of that, and I'm very engaged in it. It also was important to me to work with good people. Now that is kind of I guess a given, but it's not always possible. And so the people in the culture that I'm in was incredibly important. So when I was with people that were smart, who were engaged, who I trusted, who were good people, that was when I was the happiest. So that's kind of the lens that I looked through when I was looking at whether I was consulting or just, talking to people about different opportunities. Those are the variables I was trying to solve for. And it's because my friend Sandy taught me that. And she was very intentional about it and thoughtful about it. And it just kind of came, a little bit of light came on my head when she talked through it, which I think helped me frame what I was going to do next. Does that make sense?
It does. Tell us about your transition from entrepreneurship back into working at now EDF Energy Services. What drew you back into that world?
So at Enron, when the Enron collapse happened, I was, I'd worked for big companies and thought Enron was going to last forever. So it was kind of a shock when it collapsed for me. And it probably, looking back on it now, it probably shouldn't have been. But when you're, 28, 29 years old, just turning 30, your whole world is been around learning with really smart people, working with some of the brightest minds and fastest paced environment. And so when that happened, I remember talking with a couple of my colleagues that were, I would say, people that I trusted, people that I respected a lot, and said, you know what, I think we were all looking at, we don't want to have somebody else have our destiny at this point, because we did that already. And this was a massive explosion of chaos. So I think part of our therapy was starting something on our own that we control. And so that's kind of what led me into entrepreneurship. Is taking back a little bit of the chaos that we had just been through with Enron. And, it was not fun to let go 85 people on the day that I just found out the company was bankrupt, and seeing their faces and people crying and packing, carrying their boxes and their chairs out. It was just not a fun thing for me to do. But one of the most important things that has happened to me, I would say. So when we left, we said, we wanted to start our own company, and we were all pretty, it was myself and 4 other partners. We all had been in the retail energy space for a long time and knew that Texas was deregulating and felt like it was going to be a good business to be in. So that's when we started Just Energy back in April 16th, 2002. So Enron went bankrupt in December of 2001, and we started Just Energy April 16th, 2002 is when we put the application in with this Texas attorney, so to get that going. So from 2002 until 2007, we ran the business on our own. So it was 5 of us. We funded it ourselves. We did our own, customer service, and coming from a place where at Enron, where everything was, big and not necessarily, you didn't necessarily know how cash came in and cash went out, collecting from customers, taking customer service calls, depositing money in a bank. Those are the business things that you didn't necessarily learn being in a big company. So having this small business where we funded it ourselves, we invested our own dollars to start the business, and having that be, I learned as much there doing that as I did at Enron, where, everything was complex and sophisticated. This wasn't necessarily super sophisticated, but it was with people I trusted and who were smart. And it was learning different skills that we didn't necessarily learn when you're not an entrepreneur and running your own business.
Mm-hmm.
So in 2007, we sold the business to a Canadian company called Energy Savings Group. So this was we ran it for 5 years on our own. So we had from 2002 to 2007. And when the company bought Just Energy, they rebranded the whole company to Just Energy in 2009. So the Just Energy that exists today is I call it version 2.0 of Just Energy. So from 2007 to 2018, I ran various businesses with that company. And in 2018, I was the co-CEO at the time, and kind of felt like it was the right time to take a step back and to take a little bit of time, spend more time with my kids. So I kind of retired. Felt like that was good. I might do some board work and start to think about that and just take a little bit of a pause and do something different. So and as I was doing that, I was doing some consulting and working with some small businesses, and got a call from EDF and saying, "Hey, we would love for you to run our North American retail business." And what was interesting about that is it's a very large company, obviously the largest utility in the world, and a French-based company. And what I liked about it was getting back into the very large customer portfolio. So just EDF serves some of the largest, oil and gas providers, some of the largest, the Amazons, the Facebook, some of the tech companies. So we serve very large customers. And so what I liked about coming back into a large company, having the balance sheet, having a little bit of a better stability that way, but also having the ability to solve really complex energy problems for large customers. So that was what kind of pulled me back in. It was a different learning experience and a different problem to solve in the energy space.
Talk a little bit more about that, the complex energy problems. Can you give us what I obviously there are certain things that you can't talk about, I'm sure, but what can you tell our listeners about the nature of the more complicated problems that you're solving?
So, you have large companies now who are different things are driving their incentives to do things differently around energy. So if you have an energy bill that's $10 million a month, it's something that is a significant portion of what they're thinking about and how they're thinking about managing it. But we also have a lot of companies now, and especially it kind of started in the tech space, but it then moved over into some of the other spaces where customers have committed through some of the global initiatives to be carbon free by a certain period of time. They're being being responsible in how the energy is generated, don't want to pollute and contribute to environmental things that harm the environment. So I think we have customers who are large consumers who also want to be socially responsible. It's part of their DNA. So they're looking for ways to, partner and find ways to essentially deliver carbon-free power to their facilities. And that's not just like, they don't just hook up to a solar plant, right? So there's a lot of stuff that happens between generating solar power and actually consuming it and getting it on the grid and managing it and managing all of the stuff around the volatility and the intermittency associated with that. So because they're a bit more on the forefront, these customers of driving the demand for some of these, whether it's solar or wind power, whether it's batteries or some other kind of renewable power, they're definitely pushing the envelope. And so we're having to create structures that essentially deliver the service that they want to consume. So that's what makes it so interesting, is that you're not just, buying power and selling it. You're actually, looking at structures and working with developers that are developing wind and solar, like EDF Renewables is one of the largest developers of wind and solar, working with them and others to be able to bring those to customers and actually help get those projects done. Because a lot of times those projects won't get done unless you have somebody who's willing to, to take the offtake of it so that the financiers know that they've got a customer on the other end. So it makes it a better investment for them.
What determines whether you go with wind or solar? Is it just proximity to a wind or a solar grid?
So it kind of depends on, when the wind is blowing more, the sun is, so the sun obviously shines during the day, but you can get wind at night as well. So those two shapes of how they get generated tend to complement each other. And most people will have some kind of combination of the two, but there are different economics of building wind and solar. So, and there are different incentives and certain subsidies that are coming off. So it gets very complex into what the economics look like, because, even though customers want to have renewable sources, they don't necessarily want to pay 5 times as much for it. So,
right.
So as that technology curve has come down and has become more efficient, and solar panels and how, all of the technology that is required to build a facility, that comes down. And so it makes the cost of energy more competitive, and then more demand is being driven. So that's kind of the cycle that we're in currently, where 5-7 years ago, people who wanted to buy solar or wind, they were paying, 3 times as much as they would for brown power. So, and now it could be relatively close. So you're seeing a lot more of that pick up as well.
This may be a silly question, but
questions.
Well, thank you. There has nuclear power just fallen out of favor? Like, is there too much risk, too much fallout? Like, what happened with that?
Well, nuclear is expensive to build, but it has a zero carbon footprint. So nuclear is carbon free. As the world is looking at trying to have low emissions, nuclear power doesn't create any emissions.
Right.
So it hasn't necessarily fallen out. There's not a lot of new nuclear being built in the U.S. at least, because it is expensive to build and maintain. But the nuclear that's there is, it's reliable. Once you get it going, it's very it goes for a long time, as well as it's relatively it's carbon free. So it contributes to this carbon free footprint that the globe is trying to achieve.
And just to be clear, the reason that no one's really doing any new nuclear is just like fixed costs of getting the plant there in the first place?
Yes, and you're seeing a lot more of this distributed power with wind and solar that can be built relatively quickly. That's also renewable. That the economics of that are working. So I don't actually know if there's any new nuclear plant in the U.S. You're beyond my skis at this point, but I don't hear a lot about new nuclear facilities.
Most of our listeners probably understand the terms retail and wholesale, but can you define exactly how retail energy works for our listeners?
Retail energy is me selling directly to an end user. So whereas wholesale, you're selling not necessarily to an end user, to somebody else who's reselling it to somebody else. So
okay.
that is so. In retail energy is not necessarily markets aren't open across the U.S. necessarily, but places like Texas where it's competitive, and other places like New York, Ohio, Pennsylvania, you can essentially buy your energy from a competitive supplier. And what happens with that, especially with the segment that I'm in the large C&I, commercial and industrial space, then you can go and lock in terms. So you can lock in rates to be able to budget. You can structure products like renewables and corporate, some PPAs, purchase power agreements for wind and solar. You can structure some batteries. So you can start to really do some things that you may not be able to do with your local utilities. So that's a lot of the reason that people are looking for cost efficiency, as well as some other sophisticated products that they can get from a competitive supplier like EDF versus the utility where they're not necessarily equipped to do all of those things.
What's been the best moment for you from a career perspective in the past several years, or even dating back to, your foray into your first foray into entrepreneurship? What's been the moment where you thought, this is why I do what I do?
I think there are a couple that I would mention. When you start a business and then you're able to sell it for a profit, that feels like that's a pretty good one. That ranks up there where, what you were able to build was valuable enough that somebody else saw it and was willing to take it on. So I think that's probably the first one. I also felt like when I was stepped into the role as co-CEO with one of my original Just Energy partners, Jay Lewis, that felt like a really, being a CEO of a public company, it was hard. I learned a ton, but that was another moment where I felt like, okay, this is when it comes to thresholds and accomplishments, those are two I would say that felt really good at the time. I do think that there have been a couple times where as in a leadership role that I've been able to make an impact on people. When people come up to me after I speak at a conference and they say things like, what you said really resonated with me and I feel better about whatever it was. And so there have been 3 or 4 times it's happened to me. And I always am so grateful that somebody took the time to say it mattered to them, what I said. But also, it makes you realize that when you're having an impact on somebody, for me personally, it makes it feel like it's all worth it.
Yeah. How common is the practice of co-CEOs? I mean, it's something I've heard of before, but you're certainly the first one that I've talked to.
It's not very common. I don't think CEOs in general, probably by personality trait, like to share responsibility.
Yeah.
But I do think that Jay Lewis and I we worked together for a long time, and one of us wasn't trying to kill the other one off. We knew that together we probably were a better leader when we were able to divide and conquer than we were necessarily on our own. So it was a unique situation. I don't think it works all the time, but in this case, it did.
How did you divide the labor, so to speak?
We sat down in the very beginning and said, we could split the business in half, but what we ended up doing is saying, okay, there are certain things that are, a CEO has a really hard time looking 3 to 5 years out and knowing what's happening and what we need to be prepared for, while also keeping an eye on the day-to-day in the current situation. So, and as we looked at our skill sets, I had a little bit probably better superpower around the 3 to 5 year strategic planning. And he had a much better superpower around, okay, day to day, making sure things are going right. So we almost were able to look forwards and backwards a little bit. And so that's how we define the roles. And sometimes we flip things back and forth, where if we started a new business and it was running, I would hand it over to him and he would manage it a little bit more and operationalize it a little bit better than I could. So it just it flowed a little bit, but we tended to try to leverage the strengths of each other to divide that.
Fascinating stuff. So you were more visionary and maybe he was more integrator type. Is that fair to say?
He's an engineer by training. I'm probably the furthest thing from an engineer that is out there. So, and when you work with somebody, you over the years, you understand kind of what what they're good at and able to, I would throw things over to him, say, I know you'll do a better job at this than I will, and vice versa. So it worked.
All right. Well, one of our 3 grand challenges at Maze as a part of our strategic plan is energy. What makes you most hopeful about the future of energy? You've talked about, reducing carbon footprint and so forth. That's obviously, I think most people would agree that's a step in the right direction. What else? What is good that is happening in the energy field right now?
I love that what's happening, the changes that are happening today are being driven by people who want them to happen, not necessarily by government regulations. So if you think about the coal retirements, I think they were, and I'm going to probably mess this up a little bit, but I was reading a story a few years back about how coal, they were mandating 8 years ago, trying to get the coal plants offline to say, okay, we need to replace coal. It's polluting, and we need to get that gone. So, and during that time that it was mandated, there were very few coal retirements. It was kind of at the minimum. But as soon as things happened, like, the solar and wind got more affordable, and the cost associated with building those came down, it happened naturally where, okay, now we're replacing this with older coal plants with newer, more renewable sources, and you're seeing those retirements happen faster because they are expensive and old and they're hard to, the economics is driving a lot of it now, which is, to me, when you try to have an artificial, forceful, artificial way to make this happen, that's, to me, more is more tenuous than having it happen on its own, and the natural economics driving the change, which I think is where we are, at least in the beginning of it today. You're starting to see, you do have mandates that people have that they would like to be able to be carbon free, but you're also seeing the economics work for people as well, which to me is hopeful that this transition will continue. There's been a lot of talk about how COVID might be impacting the energy transition, and will people stop building, making investments given the current economic situation. We haven't necessarily seen that. And so I think that also feels like it's going to be continue the transition toward a cleaner fuel source.
Right. What's your greatest concern about the future of energy?
Not letting the markets work, and trying to do, meaning not having artificial regulation that prevents us from continuing on the transition, where you start to mess up some of the economics that might be free flowing. So I'm clearly a competitive market person. So that's my entire
Me too.
In that. So I'm probably a little biased, but I'm an optimist. I feel like we're on a great path, and what I'm seeing now, things keep picking up and customers keep demanding more, and we're able to deliver more interesting structures that solve problems, and it just seems to be working.
Tell us about the Hawthorne Club and the Women's Energy Network in Houston.
Sure. So the Hawthorn Club was started by a woman named Mead Harris, and I was introduced to her in 2018. So it's been about 2 years ago, where and I went to their annual national conference in New York in April of 2018 and just loved it. And what I love about the Hawthorn Club is have a lot of women who are in kind of the clean energy space or energy in some way. It could be people serving, creating data platforms that help us understand how solar is generated better, or it could be people who are, like EDF, who are creating these structures for customers. So what I loved about it was you had, 50 or so, it's a very small group of women that are from around the globe, Australia, London, everywhere. And you come together and everybody's here trying to solve the energy problems of the world. And I love the conversation is around energy and what's happening, and being kind of part of that, and not necessarily about being women in energy. So that's what I love about the Hawthorne Club. Even though it is a women's group, it's very much focused on, very smart, highly successful women who are ready to make the world a better place through our influence in clean energy. So that, to me, I love. And I think the work that they're doing to create that network that we can collaborate together to be able to find out what's going on and be able to do those things, to me, has been really, really powerful for me. The Women's Energy Network is actually something that I've been a part of as an advisory role for years now. And what I love about the Women's Energy Network is that has a group of, in the Houston chapter, we have almost 2,000 members in Houston. And that is a place where, from, whether you're starting your career out or whether you're, a leader in your space, there are different things for everybody that are part of that. And really that's about connecting women and creating this, a network of women that you can connect with, that you will be able to kind of, build that connectivity and network for you and for your career. So, and in education. So we have some great programs with mentoring and that have been where women are able to get mentorship outside of their office, which is helpful sometimes when you don't necessarily work with the person who's your mentor, that, you can say something, maybe you're a little bit more safer space than somebody who you work with every day. So I think that they're two slightly different avenues, but they're both female focused, but one, I would say, much more on networking, creating space and mentoring for women in all phases of their career. And the Hawthorn Club is about, executive women driving change in the globe toward a renewable energy.
Makes sense. What are the challenges that you've found are most common for women, specifically in the energy industry? I mean, everybody's sort of familiar with the image of, the dude in boots driving a pickup truck in oil and gas. But does that carry over? But how are the challenges? What are the challenges like in the sectors of the energy industry you're most familiar with, especially for women?
So I think the challenges are, in this may be somewhat controversial, but the place I work in the space I work in, I should say, is competitive energies and renewable sources. Is not necessarily, I would say oil and gas. So I know. Yeah. So I haven't really experienced the kind of typical, good old boy network that has made my life. I'm clearly things that I've done pretty well. So I think things have gone well. I think that the challenges for women in any work environment, whether it's energy or anything else, are fighting against our tendencies and things that might hold us back from realizing our full potential. Meaning, I talk about networking, and men network more frequently and just more naturally, I think, than women do. Women tend not to. So a great example would be, everybody's out in the golf outing. But a lot of times the women are like, oh, I don't need to do that. I'm going to stay back and get some work done. So not everybody, I'm just saying in general, it's one of those things where kind of pushing women to put themselves forward for things, and have that being a more vocal advocate for yourself. I think that those are the challenges around, networking, being a vocal advocate for yourself, leaning in. I mean, to my book that I give away most is Sheryl Sandberg's Lean In. So I think that, having that, taking control of it yourself and not necessarily kind of waiting for it to happen is what I found the biggest challenge, and what I talk to women about all the time, which is, and I've done it myself too. I've sat, haven't gone to the golf outing, or I've preferred not to, be part of something that, or networking because it took time and I really didn't want to do it. But it's really something that pushing yourself to do those things is something that I think women have to be a little bit more conscious about, I would say.
That makes sense. And I'm sorry, I didn't mean to ask the question in a confusing way.
No.
It's interesting that you say that, because I find, and this is just my own observation, subject to observer bias, of course. I've always thought of women as being better than men at finding community with each other, but maybe that's more true. I don't know. Maybe that's more true in our personal lives. I know that, like, men, and I'm this is sweeping generalizations here, over generalizations, I'm sure, but I don't, I'm trying to organize this in a way that makes sense. I don't know if there's anything more to be had here just now.
Yeah, no. So if you think about, I do think that men are conditioned a little bit more, even growing up. You think about in the classroom, boys raise their hands or talk before raising their hands.
Sure.
Girls are waiting for their turn and being polite. And so it's kind of this, pushing yourself forward and putting yourself up for a promotion. When I was co-CEO of Just Energy, one of the things I found is as we were looking across the talent pool, I was somewhat frustrated that when we were saying, hey, who could run this business? Who's ready for the next challenge? And I remember these conversations and thinking all the people's names are coming up are all men. And I know we have a very diverse, population. We've got a lot of smart women who are probably ready, but I don't see them. But for some reason, I saw the men, and what that kind of forced me to do is say, I need to be more intentional about finding ways to connect with women of all levels. We had 1,500 employees across 5 countries, so it was hard to know everybody. So it created the Women's Leadership Council, where it gave me an opportunity to really start to pull people in to say, okay, connect with people, having events, having opportunities to be able to have luncheons and talk and listen to what people are, how they got where they are, and really help people learn and have a sense of community with each other. And it also helped me to see women who I may not have seen before, because they're not necessarily pushing themselves forward and saying, hey, look at me, raise their hand. They're waiting for somebody to ask them, not necessarily to somebody to say, hey, I'm ready. Which is a typical more male thing to do.
How do you think American culture, and specifically here, just the way that you phrased that made me think of American dating culture, where the gentleman is usually the one to ask the lady. It's even present in proposals. Normally, not always, but more often than not, the gentleman is the one who proposes. Do you think that an evolution in how we do that would help both men and women come to a place of more fully realized identity in the long term?
That's interesting question. But I also think, I'm 49, so what people are doing in their 20s today is probably vastly different than what I was doing in my 20s. So I think things are different, even though I have 2 sons. I've got a 17-year-old, he'll be 18 in a few months, and a 15-year-old. So just watching them and their interaction, a lot different than I remember in high school. So with friends, with female and male. So it's, I don't think it's the same anymore.
That's true.
There's something to be said for tradition as well. So I think there are things that people should do what makes them feel good. And
no question. What effects has the pandemic had on you professionally? You mentioned that there were some things people were worried about in terms of the focus on solar and wind energy. I think what you said specifically was there was some concern that people might stop building new solar and wind, but that has not happened. What has changed with COVID?
Everybody's experiencing this, the way we work. Us having this conversation over Zoom. If anybody knew what Zoom was 6 months ago, I sure as heck didn't. So, finding ways to be able to connect with your team and be present was something that I think everybody was worried about. And so for the first 2 or 4 weeks, I had staff meetings 3 times a week for 30 minutes as just touch points to make sure that I knew what people were, what was going on, and people felt, didn't feel sequestered in their own home. What's been interesting to me is that everything in the beginning of, okay, how are we going to be able to connect? How are we going to make sure that everybody is, on board? And, we're in a business of people are our resources. So we don't make widgets, right? So we have people who talk to customers, who solve problems, so that's really what we do. So having that ability, the fear of how was that going to work when we're not physically together, was I think, dominated probably the first 3 or 4 weeks, and everybody was hyper focused on, I mean, my calendar, I think I had to start scheduling bathroom breaks for 50, because I would be sitting here for 12 hours on Zoom, on meetings. And so that was something that I think we kind of hyper or overcompensated for that. What I'm seeing now is people seem to be kind of settled into it, and it's working. And, communication is better in some ways. People feel more balanced, as, if I want to go out and take a 30-minute walk over lunch, that's another quick exercise, and that I would have never done if I were working in an office. So I think that everybody is, I've been very intentional about making sure that I'm connected with the team. That seems to be working, and everybody seems to be kind of settled into what they need to get done. So I know it's been surprising how easy it's been for people. We're having a great year. So it's, which is something that I know not everybody can say. So I think it's being in the right space, it's having a great team, and things are just working.
That's great. I'm happy that is going well. Let's move to rapid fire. What do you consider your most valuable failure?
The collapse of Enron. Maybe it wasn't my personal failure, but it was certainly a career failure where, the whole thing just exploded, and I felt like, what am I going to do? So having that happen and starting your own business and working with people that you're able to build something with was really something, I would say, a defining moment in my career.
What do you think is people's biggest misconception of you?
I've heard people say that I'm intimidating. And so, but my kids actually confirm that I can be scary sometimes. So I think I'm very direct. I'm very, to the point. And sometimes that can be somewhat, not everybody reacts well to that. So as I've gotten older, I've been much more intentional and making sure that I've got, that I'm not coming across too strong. So
if you could have anyone as a mentor for one day, who would it be?
I think about artists and people that are somebody that I don't have that skill set. Again, I go back to my superpower is trying to find things that other people are good at that I'm not. And I think having somebody like a Maya Angelou, I love her, her messages and her poetry. I'm not somebody who reads poetry, but she just has always resonated with me, and her quotes and kind of how she viewed the world, and having her maybe make me be a little bit more in touch with some of those things would be something that I could probably learn from.
I love that answer. What is the most important advice you would give to yourself exactly 5 years ago?
I think be intentional. I tend to put my head down and just figure it out and go. So if there's a problem in front of me, if there's something that, whether it's running a business or being a mom or being a friend, I tend to just put my head down and just plow through things, which can be a very good skill, but also I think you sometimes miss some things. So kind of picking your head up, being a little bit more intentional about some of the other things that instead of just driving to accomplish would be something that I'm trying to do more now. So part of the reason that I'm enjoying the role that I'm in today is, in 2015, I think I flew 350,000 miles on United, and, I was flying all over the place, and now I'm working from home, and I've got 2 teenage boys. So I'm going to wake up here hopefully at noon, if they'll get up at noon. But just having this, much more balanced view of the world, and intentional view of the world.
What is so intentional? It sounds like, being deliberate about spending time with your family. What other shapes does that take? And I'm asking a follow-up to a rapid fire. So just briefly, but what does that look like for you?
So I've also, in the last few years, have been more intentional about finding strong women who I can be friends with. Like, so being more intentional about saying, okay, I need, it's not just about, kids and career, it's also about what I need personally to be able to have a good network of people who have your back, people who are going to be there for you. And I think that's not something I necessarily sought out previously, but I've been much more intentional about saying, you know what, it's important to have friendships, people you can rely on. And so when you find those, make sure you're cultivating them. So, making sure that you're more intentional about those things as well, just about what you bring into your life and what you don't. And that is all of that being intentional instead of by accident or just letting it flow, to me is what I've forced myself to be doing a little bit more, as well as continue to try to do.
I like that. What important truth do very few people agree with you on?
The way to be successful in the business world, I think a lot of people feel like you have to have traits that are more manly. I tend to think that, I read an article a long time ago from like the 80s or 90s. I can't even remember where I saw it, but I remember reading this article about this woman who was the CEO of Ogilvy and Mathers, who was a large advertising agency in New York, and this is back in like the 90s. Yeah. And I forget the woman's name, but she was one of the first heads of that business. And she said, you know what, I'm terrible at if I'm trying to do this job like a man, I'm going to stink at it. But if I try to do it like a woman, I will probably do a pretty good job. And I think that always resonated with me, to say that I think intuitively people feel like you have to have certain traits and try to adapt to the traits of somebody that you think would be successful. And I tend to say, you know what, it has to be genuine. It's got to be who you are. And I am not a man, so I'm going to approach it like I would myself, not necessarily like trying to be something I'm not. So I think not everybody, I think everybody would agree with being authentic and truthful, but I think subconsciously a lot of people feel like you have to have certain traits to be successful, and those tend to be a little bit more man traits. And so I think having that, saying it like that is probably not everybody would agree with, but maybe they would.
Okay. You mentioned Lean In as the book you've given most often as a gift. Anything you want to say about that?
I read it, and I read. I don't read enough, but it resonated with me because it was more about taking control on your own and grabbing things versus waiting for it to happen. And I think that resonated with me. And I've given it to, when I started Women's Leadership Council, I gave it to everybody to read before an offsite so that we could all talk about it. And so it was just unusual for me. I haven't really done that. I've done it with a strategy book as well called Playing to Win, but those are the two books that I've given the most.
If you could have a billboard anywhere with anything on it, where would it be and what would it say?
Be kind and put it everywhere. I think I feel like where we are today and understanding, somebody else's position and being thoughtful and kind to others, that to me is something the world could use a little bit more of.
What is your fondest memory of TAMU?
So because I went through the executive program, I wasn't on campus. So,
right.
But we did have periodic kind of field trips where we would go and go on campus. And we had a weekend where we went to a football game, which I had never experienced anything like that in my life. But I love football, I love sports. And so sitting in the stands, having the whole, everybody swaying at the same time, I was totally lost the whole time. I was like, what is happening here? But it's such a unique tradition. And I remember somebody introducing me to Shinerbach beer as well. So A&M football and Shinerbach beer is the two things the most memorable moments.
Great answers. We end each session with Good Bull. Do you have anyone you would like to send some Good Bull? My two sons. They have been incredible the last few years, and they're watching these kids grow up and they're adults now. And I think, essentially, I mean, my oldest is 6'5", 275, and my youngest is 6'6",
270. So they're big boys, and just, how they have cared and been, mature and had, be there for their mom as well as letting me be their mother. Can't say enough about them.
Are they linemen? Like, do they play sports? This is like, I'm not a small person, but that's way bigger than me.
Big. So yeah, they play sports. My oldest plays football at Straight Jesuit. So he's in the recruiting process now. He's got several scholarship offers to play offensive tackle. And my youngest is a baseball player. He's been injured the last few years. He just had Tommy John surgery on his elbow, but when he gets back to having a 6'6" pitcher out there is going to be an interesting intimidation. But yeah, they're great kids.
I'm sure they are. Thank you for sharing that with us. Deb, thank you so much for your time in general. This was really fun. Thank you for the conversation.
This has been great. Hopefully you it helps somebody.
I believe that it will, and I think a lot of people will enjoy listening to it.
Good.
For our MasterCast top 3 takeaways, I want to talk first. I'm going to work my way kind of backwards in the episode because of recency effect, but I really like what Deb said about what variables make you most happy and thinking through that in your career. I think that's so important and not something that we necessarily check in with consciously as often as we probably should. When the first time that I did something like this, I used the decision-making matrix, which I teach in our MBA program, and it has criteria for success across the top. So it's like, what would make you feel like this was a successful decision, and alternatives. And so the criteria for success would be things like she talked about. A criteria for success for a job would be being able to learn something new. For me, it also includes flexibility, autonomy, making an impact in people's lives. Those are criteria for me to feel like I have a successful job. And then I could list the alternatives of what jobs, my current job, this job I might want, this job I had before. I could list those alternatives and think about what next steps I might want to take. And that's been really helpful for me. But it's easy to not be conscious about that and what factors or variables would lead you to happiness. I liked her idea of using a happiness index. That was pretty cool.
Yeah. From a career perspective, I think the career leader motivators, I've mentioned before that I have the sheet that I still keep in the front of my my little leather bound portfolio, if we're going to use the fancy term.
Because you're super cool like that.
Super fancy.
What are your motivators? You have mentioned that a few times that career leader was extremely impactful. What are some of yours that stick out?
My motivators in order. Okay, I'll give the motivator and the score. Lifestyle, 12. The position allows ample time to pursue other important aspects of my lifestyle, family, leisure activities, etc. And in this case, also the opportunity to look at other businesses that I might want to be a part of or be into. Security, the position offers a great deal of security in terms of predictable salary, benefits, future employment. That's more important to me than I realized, but I only need that coming from one place. It doesn't have to be because it allows me to take risk elsewhere.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Financial gain is a 9. So security is a 10. Financial gain is a 9. The position provides excellent opportunity for exceptional financial reward. So I guess security is kind of the financial downside, like a high financial floor, and then financial gain, I guess that is the high financial ceiling. Managing people, the position, that's a 9 as well. The position offers the opportunity to manage and direct other people. Positioning is an 8, offers experience and access to people and opportunities that will help me position well for my next career move. Affiliation is a 7. The position offers a setting with enjoyable colleagues with whom I feel a sense of belonging. That's an important one to me. And it's the only thing that I would change about my job at the fund is I would like it if we ran a slightly bigger shop, but it's just not, with the amount of assets that we're managing, we have to keep it small for the time being. And that's just the nature of the beast.
But again, you get that in a lot of the other things that you do. Like, you've made such a strong connection with us. You've made a strong connection with Steve. Like, you've made a strong connection in the other businesses that you're working on, which you can do because that lifestyle is important and you've balanced that pretty well.
Yeah, I've been fortunate in that respect, and to be fair, the fund has been very encouraging of my other pursuits, provided that they don't interfere with me getting my day-to-day work done. Intellectual challenge is a 7 as well. The position offers consistent intellectual challenge. Autonomy is a 6. This one didn't score as high as I thought it would. The position offers considerable autonomy and independence. I would have thought that would be at the top of the list, and it wasn't.
But maybe because you like the team aspect of it.
Yeah, true.
Those might be in conflict some.
Right. Variety is a 4 for me. The position offers a great deal of variety in the nature of the work performed. This is another one that I would have thought would be higher. Altruism is important to me, and mentorship is really important to me, but it doesn't have to show up in my primary job, and it doesn't have to be directly connected to the work either.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Management is more important to me than the perception of power or influence. Recognition, the position is in an environment where individual accomplishments are recognized with praise from peers and superiors. There are a lot of things I need. That is just not one of them. Prestige is a 0. The position is with an organization that commands a great deal of prestige in its field. Although interestingly, Mays Business School commands a great deal of prestige in its field. So I didn't really think about that.
But that's also a side thing. It's not your primary. I mean, this is part of what you're doing. It's not the core of what you're doing. My motivators were flexibility, autonomy, and I don't have my fancy portfolio, so I don't know exactly, and then altruism, and then the intellectual one, stimulation or whatever. But I won't read the rest of them to you. For our second takeaway, I want to talk about what Deb said about being a woman and being a leader. Specifically, she said that someone in her life had said, if I try to be like a man, I will stink. If I try to be like a man as a leader, I will stink. And there's some really interesting research on when a woman comes in to lead a country. And we've seen a lot, actually right now in COVID, women leaders are having better results with COVID than male leaders of countries.
Oh.
But have you seen that?
No, I haven't. I believe it.
Yeah, way to go, ladies. Work. But the other piece of that's interesting is that despite what we might expect related to maybe some stereotypes we have about women, when a woman is leading a country and less than 40% of the other leaders, I'm going to get some of this wrong, by the way, but the gist of it is when a woman is leading a country, but the majority of the other decision makers within that country, so like let's say the majority of Congress is not women, or at least 40% of them are not women, then that woman leader, when they first come in, oftentimes the country is more violent in that case. So like they'll almost overcompensate for being a woman and try to act more like a man in a way that even makes them more geopolitical unrest or violence than a male leader. But as long as there's enough women surrounding them in leadership, then that country is much less violent. So just interesting. And cause and effect is difficult to look at in studies, but this particular study was talking about how oftentimes it's that woman leader is coming in and trying to show, I'm not going to act like a woman. I'm going to be heavy-handed. And then they end up overdoing it. Was that a good thought at all?
It is. Well, one thing that I want to be careful of is I think that our society is doing a good job of moving away from description of like, this is acting like a man, this is acting like a woman. But there are some behaviors that are that are traditionally considered masculine. That's not an unfair thing to say.
Let's take this conversation as if we're talking just stereotypes, right?
Right.
So you're going into a leadership position as a woman. There is something in the back of your mind that says, don't act like, and I'm putting it in quotes, a woman, right? Act more like a man. And I've had people say that to me, or say some version of that to me at work with some frequency. Like, well, but you don't act like a woman. You act more like a man. So, da, da, da. Or but you're like more masculine than most women. So, and not necessarily in like how I present myself, but in the decisions that I make or how I act in a meeting. But I think that that's in large part because that's what's been rewarded in the workplace. And so that's what I've continued to move closer to. I mean, and maybe I was just born that way. I don't know. But there's definitely a movement of that's what's rewarded in the things that I like to do. And I think it is easy for women to say, that's the example that's been set for me. I need to act like that. And probably the example was a man. I need to act like that to be successful.
Right.
And then you don't capitalize on some of the qualities or strengths that might make you most successful because you're trying to act like this thing that you may not be.
Right. No, that does make sense. One thing that has stuck with me that you've said about kind of how you comport yourself in the workplace, Shannon, is you're not going to be the one who brings the birthday cake. And I've always thought my internal response to that was, yeah, that's right. I don't care if Shannon brings my birthday cake. I want Shannon to be the best assistant dean of graduate programs that she can be, and the best executive producer and co-host of the Maze MasterCast that she can be. And just speaking frankly, Shannon as a leader doesn't have time to bring the birthday cake. There's more important, not that recognizing people on their birthdays is unimportant, but the level of, for me and only me, bringing a birthday cake to work that's a level of recognition of my birthday that I actually don't want. I love being told happy birthday, but at work, we've got stuff to do. And when I get a birthday cake at work, it doesn't happen these days, but when I used to get a birthday cake at work, my response was kind of almost not embarrassment, but just sort of I appreciate it, but this wasn't necessary. And so I'm glad you don't bring the birthday cake.
No, I think the birthday example is a really good example to illustrate what I'm trying to say. So I actually would not bring a birthday cake in my life outside of work. It's just not natural for me for a few reasons that have nothing, that may or may not have anything to do with gender. But for a few reasons, that's not the role I'm going to play. I don't like to bake. I don't even want to go pick up the cake. I don't care about cake that much. I don't care about birthdays that much. We didn't really have a lot of birthday parties growing up, right? So it would be totally unnatural for me to even bring a birthday cake to a friend. I have to put a lot of effort into remembering to say happy birthday to a friend because it doesn't matter to me. I don't care if you don't tell me happy birthday. And so I might forget. So that's a good example of where my natural behavior happens to be matching the behavior I'm trying to, or the image I'm trying to project at work. Where I think it gets dicey is if you're a woman who usually is the person who brings a birthday cake and you say, I'm not going to do that at work because that's acting too much like a woman and I need to act more like a man. That's where I think the discussion gets interesting is I'm the one who always brings the birthday cake, but I'm not going to do that at work because I don't want to present myself in that light. And I'm not saying that's not a good idea because I do think it presents some problems or it presents some challenges related to image. But that's where I think women run into some issues where they start trying to act more like a man and then end up overcompensating. Because it's not natural. It's not what you're doing. It's not actually what you want to be doing or saying. You're trying to play a character.
Right. It is good for everyone to be themselves and I guess be the best version of themselves. It's a combination of being yourself and putting your best foot forward, whether you're talking about, personal relationships or your business life. What does this situation call for? And how can I give the situation what it needs without sacrificing who I am? And that balance is very difficult to strike sometimes.
But I do like what you said about being your best self. I think the balance is less difficult to strike when we are being our best selves because it's not even really, it doesn't have to be so much of a choice or an effort, right? When I'm in my best self, I just be me and it's going to be good. It's when I'm not at my best self that I'm having to work to be something I'm not feeling at that moment.
Right.
Interesting stuff, Ben Wiggins.
Yes, very much so.
For our third takeaway, I could probably come up with a lot of brilliant things to say about nuclear energy, but what I really want to know is, have you watched the TV show Dark on Netflix?
It's just called Dark?
It's called Dark, just Dark.
Huh.
So since you haven't watched the show, there's not a lot for us to discuss here. But I will say, and there's a lot of, this is a well-worn trope, but, nuclear is really interesting because it is expensive to build, not very expensive to keep running.
Right.
Maintenance is expensive, but the in-between stuff, no carbon footprint, but when it goes wrong, it goes really wrong. And so people are so scared. And then you get a show like Dark that doesn't put the nuclear power plant as the hero of the story. And I just was watching it thinking, oh man, I wonder what the lobbyists are thinking about this show right now.
Yeah, yeah. Have there been any really problematic nuclear power plant events beyond Chernobyl?
Well, the one in Japan during the tsunami, it was not because of the power plant, but because of the tsunami. So that tsunami impacted the nuclear plant, which caused an accident. So, or that wasn't just a breakdown of the nuclear plant, it was a natural disaster, but still,
yeah,
whatever the cause, there's a lot of fear around you're storing really toxic materials
right
as a result. So if they can figure that piece out, then nuclear seems great. And relative to other incidents, it still is lower. It just is very scary.
Yeah.
Easy to capitalize on in entertainment for sure.
Right.
I can't wait for you to watch Dark. And so I'll kick it over to you to close us with a quote.
Okay. This is a more uplifting quote than discussion of nuclear accidents. This is from our wedding vows. It's something by Roy Croft. I love you not only for what you are, but for what I am when I am with you. I love you not only for what you have made of yourself, but what you are making of me. I love you for the part of me that you bring out. I love you for putting your hand into my heaped up heart and passing over all the dark, weak things that you can't help dimly seeing there, and for drawing out into the light all the beautiful belongings that no one else had looked quite far enough to find. I love you because you are helping me to make of the lumber of my life not a tavern but a temple, out of the works of my everyday not a reproach but a song. I love you because you have done more than any code would have done to make me good, and more than any fate could have done to make me happy. You have done it without a touch, without a word, without a sign. You have done it by being yourself.
Beautiful. Happy anniversary to Ben and Maddie.
Thanks. It's coming up quick.
An MBA from Texas A&M University can take your career to a whole new level. With full-time and weekend options, Texas A&M suits your schedule. So get a better gig. Visit mba.tamu.edu.